The wind howled across the Wyoming prairie like a hungry wolf, dragging the chill of early winter with it. Roslyn Hayes stood in the doorway of her small cabin, her hands gripping the shawl tight around her shoulders. The sun was sinking behind the far mountains, painting the sky in crimson and gold, but she found no beauty in it anymore, not since Thomas died. 6 months had passed since they laid him beneath the hard Wyoming ground, another soul claimed by the unforgiving land. The fever had taken him quick, leaving her with nothing but memories, debts, and the baby stirring beneath her heart. She pressed her hand to her swollen belly, whispering softly, "Easy now, little one. We'll make it through somehow." Her voice was barely louder than the wind. Inside, the cabin creaked like an old ship in the storm. The place Thomas had built with his own hands, rough-hewn logs and stubborn pride, was all that remained of their dream. 40 acres of dry land, 20 miles from town, and a handful of livestock that barely held on. He had believed they could make a life here. Now, Roslyn was the only one left to try. She closed the door against the cold and went to the stove, stirring the thin soup she had made from the last scraps of salt pork and withered vegetables. The smell filled the one-room home, though it brought little comfort. On the table sat the ledger, open to the page that haunted her most. Mortgage due, $37.50. It might as well have been $1,000. She had no way to pay. The bank in Laramie would take the land soon, and then she and her unborn child would have nowhere to go. She sat down, her back aching from another day of endless chores. The well pump had stuck again that morning, and the garden fence needed mending after rabbits had found their way in. Every corner of her life seemed to be falling apart, piece by piece. Tears pricked her eyes, but she forced them back. "Crying don't fix a thing," she muttered, echoing her grandmother's voice. Her grandmother, Uli, used to tell her that the Lord helps those who help themselves, and that kindness should never be forgotten. Remember that, ma petite. Help those in need. It's what separates us from beasts. The words drifted through her mind now, soft as a prayer. The wind rattled the shutters, and in the distance wolves cried to the rising moon. Roslyn shivered. Winter was coming fast, and the baby was due in 2 months. She had written to Thomas's brother in Kansas, begging for help, but no answer had come. Likely never would. When the soup was gone, she read a few verses from her grandmother's Bible by the dim light of the kerosene lamp. The flame flickered weakly, and the shadows danced across the log walls. The oil was nearly gone, and she couldn't afford more. Blowing out the flame, she lay down in the dark. The bed felt too big without Thomas beside her, the silence too heavy. She curled around her belly, whispering, "We'll be all right." But she didn't believe it. The next afternoon, dark clouds rolled in from the north. Roslyn was coming back from checking her empty snares when she heard it. A faint sound carried on the wind. Hoofbeats, slow, uneven, coming down the trail toward her cabin. She froze on the porch, one hand instinctively going to her belly, the other reaching for the rifle Thomas had left behind. "Always be ready," he used to say. This land doesn't forgive the unprepared. Out of the gray haze came a black stallion, its sides lathered with foam, breath coming in harsh gasps. Even in its weariness, the animal was magnificent. But it wasn't the horse that made her heart race. It was the man slumped over the saddle. His coat, fine and expensive, was soaked with blood. The horse staggered to a stop by the creek, just 50 yards from her cabin. The rider tried to dismount, failed, and collapsed into the dirt. Roslyn hesitated. Every warning screamed inside her. This could be a trap. Outlaws sometimes used such tricks, feigning injury to lure in the unsuspecting. But then she heard a low groan, faint and full of pain. Her grandmother's words whispered again, "Help those in need." Gripping the rifle tight, Roslyn walked toward the stranger, cautious, alert. The horse lifted its head weakly, eyes rolling with exhaustion. The man lay face down, his breathing shallow. She saw blood seeping from his side, the dark stain spreading across his coat. "Mister," she called. Can you hear me?" A groan. Then, slowly, he turned his head. Beneath the dust and blood was a man in his 50s, maybe older, with silver-streaked hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His face was pale, his eyes half open and filled with pain, but also something else. Dignity. "Water," he rasped. "Please." Roslyn lowered the rifle. Whatever danger he might be, he wouldn't live long without help. "Stay still," she said, though he clearly couldn't move anyway. She hurried back to the cabin, filled a tin cup, and returned with a clean cloth. Kneeling beside him, she helped him drink. He swallowed greedily, some color creeping back into his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. I'm sorry to trouble you." "You've been shot," she said quietly. He nodded weakly. 3 days ago. Thought I'd lost them. Guess I was wrong." "Can you stand?" He gave a faint, tired smile. "Doubt I could, even if my life depended on it, which I suppose it does. Then we'll manage another way." It took nearly an hour to get him to the cabin. He leaned on her shoulder, each step an agony, until finally she got him onto her bed. His coat and vest were ruined, soaked through. When she unbuttoned his shirt, she found the wound, angry, festering, the skin around it dark with infection. "It's bad," she murmured. "I know," he replied calmly. "Knew it yesterday." She cleaned the wound with what water and whiskey she had left. He gritted his teeth, barely making a sound. "What's your name?" she asked as she worked. "Benjamin," he said faintly. "Benjamin Caldwell." Roslyn froze, the cloth slipping from her fingers. The name struck like lightning. She had heard it whispered in town with awe and fear. Benjamin Caldwell, the richest man in the territory, owner of half the ranches in Wyoming. She stared at him in disbelief. "You're the Benjamin Caldwell?" His lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Unless there's another fool by that name bleeding in your bed. Why are you out here alone?" Quote, "Trying to die in peace, I suppose," he said, voice dry as dust. And as the cold night gathered around the little cabin, Roslyn Hayes, a poor pregnant widow with nothing left, found herself tending to a dying stranger, one who owned almost everything for 1,000 miles in every direction. And he had just placed his life in her hands. Roslyn worked through the long night, tending the stranger with every bit of strength she had left. The fever had taken hold, burning through his body until sweat drenched the quilts. She wiped his face again and again with cool water, whispering quiet prayers when his breathing grew shallow. Every so often, his eyes would flicker open, clouded, but aware. "Benjamin," she said once when he stirred, "you need to stay still." "Don't think it matters much," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "It's too late for that. Don't talk like that." He smiled faintly. "You remind me of my wife, always scolding me when I got reckless." Quote. Roslyn looked at him, seeing past the blood and dirt to the man he must have been once, strong, proud, accustomed to command. The name Caldwell carried power in these parts, whispered by ranchers and bankers alike. But now that power lay dying in her humble bed, a man no different from any other when life began to slip away. "Your wife," she asked softly, "is she?" Quote, "Gone," he said simply. 20 years now. Fever took her too. He turned his head toward her, eyes tired but sharp. "You have someone?" "My husband," she said quietly. "Thomas. Buried him 6 months ago." His expression softened. "I'm sorry. This land, it doesn't forgive easily." "No," she said. "It surely doesn't." He was silent for a while, drifting between sleep and wakefulness. When he spoke again, it was so soft she almost didn't hear him. "You could have left me by the creek. Taken my horse, my gun, my things. No one would have known." "That's not who I am," she said simply. "No," he whispered, "it isn't." The lamp burned low as dawn approached. Roslyn's hands ached from work, but she refused to rest. Each time Benjamin's breathing slowed, fear gripped her chest. She had seen death before, and she knew it was near. Still, she sat beside him, determined he wouldn't die alone. When the first light crept through the cracks in the shutters, Benjamin stirred again. His voice was weak but steady. "Mrs. Hayes, my coat pocket." She frowned. "What about it?" Quote, "Papers," he said. "I need to write something." "You shouldn't move." "Please." Reluctantly, she fetched his leather portfolio. It was heavy, filled with documents, the kind that meant money and land, things far beyond her world. Benjamin fumbled for his pen, his hands trembling. "Ink," he rasped, quickly. She brought Thomas's old ink bottle and pen. Sitting up with her help, Benjamin began to write, the pen scratching across the page in uneven lines. Roslyn stood nearby, unsure what to do, watching a dying man fight to put something on paper that seemed to matter more than his own life. When he finished, his hand shook as he folded the paper and handed it to her. "Keep this safe," he said. "Promise me." "I don't understand," she said, clutching it in confusion. "You will," he whispered. "Keep it safe, Mrs. Hayes." He sank back against the pillow, exhaustion stealing what little strength remained. His breathing grew ragged again, and Roslyn sat beside him, holding his hand. He turned his head slightly toward her. "Roslyn," he said quietly, "you have a kind heart. The world needs more of that." She felt her throat tighten. "You should rest." He smiled faintly. "Rest?" "Yes." For a while, silence filled the cabin except for the wind moaning outside and the crackle of the dying fire. Then Benjamin's eyes opened once more, clear and sharp like blue winter sky. "The papers," he whispered. "They're important land deeds." "All of them." "Land deeds," she repeated. He nodded, struggling to speak. "The letter I wrote, it's my will, legal enough, witnessed by you. Everything I own, every ranch, every head of cattle, it's yours." Roslyn froze, the words not sinking in at first. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You don't even know me." Quote, "I know enough," he said faintly. "You gave water to a dying man when you had nothing. That tells me all I need." Her hands trembled as she gripped his. "You have family." He let out a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "A sister and her son, vultures waiting for me to die so they can tear apart what I built. They'll fight you, they'll try to take it all, but I made sure it's legal." "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why trust me with something like this?" Quote, his eyes softened. "Because you remind me of what I lost. Kindness, faith. Margaret would have liked you." He coughed again, blood flecking his lips. "The safe, in my study at the Rocking Sea Ranch, behind the painting of the mountains. Combination, Margaret's birthday. March 15th, 1831. 3/15/31, remember that. 3/15/31, Roslyn repeated numbly. "Good," he smiled faintly. "There's gold there. Enough to see you through until the lawyers finish their work." Her eyes filled with tears. "Benjamin, please, save your strength." Quote, he looked past her, eyes unfocused now, as if seeing something far beyond the little cabin walls. "Evelyn will come," he whispered. "Don't let her win. Promise me." "I promise," she said through tears. "Roslyn Hayes," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "You're stronger than you know." His grip tightened weakly around her fingers. "Thank you for the water, for reminding me there's still good left in this world." Then his hand went still. His chest rose once, then no more. The cabin fell silent, except for the wind rattling the window panes. Roslyn sat there for a long time, unable to move, his hands still in hers. Outside, the gray morning light spilled across the frozen earth. The richest man in Wyoming had died in her bed, leaving her with an empire she never asked for and a promise she couldn't yet understand. Finally, she laid his hand gently on his chest, whispering a prayer for his soul. She folded the will and placed it with the leather portfolio, hiding them deep in her trunk beneath Thomas's Sunday suit. Then she looked around the small cabin, the cracked walls, the empty shelves, the life that had seemed to end the day her husband died. Now, somehow, it had begun again, but with it came something else. Danger, because soon the world would come asking questions about Benjamin Caldwell. And when they did, they would find his fortune resting in the hands of a young, penniless widow. The funeral had been simple but solemn. Benjamin Caldwell, the wealthiest man in the Wyoming Territory, was laid to rest on a quiet hill overlooking Laramie Creek. Jake Morrison, the foreman of the Rocking Sea Ranch, had ridden in with a handful of ranch hands to pay their respects. When the ceremony ended, the grizzled cowboy tipped his hat toward Roslyn. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "Mr. Caldwell told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to help you. Said you'd need it." Roslyn had nodded, too stunned and weary to say much. That had been 3 days ago. Now, she stood on her porch, her belly heavy with child, as the distant sound of carriages broke the silence. She recognized the sound instantly. Fine horses, fine harness, and the unmistakable jingle of wealth on the move. Her hand went to the rifle beside the door. The carriages came into view, 2 gleaming black ones, followed by several riders. They stopped before her cabin, throwing up clouds of dust. From the first carriage stepped a tall, severe-looking woman dressed head to toe in black silk. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp and cold. "Mrs. Hayes, I presume?" Roslyn's heart sank. "You must be Mrs. Whitmore." "Evelyn Caldwell Whitmore," the woman corrected, each word dripping with disdain. "I am Benjamin's sister." She climbed the steps without waiting for permission, her gloved hand brushing dust from her skirt. Behind her followed a younger man, soft-faced, well-fed, and arrogant, and a thin lawyer carrying a leather case. Evelyn's gaze swept across the humble cabin. "So this is where my brother died. How tragic and how convenient." Roslyn's fingers tightened around the rifle. "He died with peace and dignity," she said. Evelyn gave a cold laugh. "He died delirious, you mean? My brother was not himself. And now, Mrs. Hayes, I will need the papers he carried." "They belong to me," Roslyn said firmly. "By his will." The younger man snorted. "His will? You expect anyone to believe that? Some poor widow tricks a dying man into signing away an empire? Don't insult us." The lawyer stepped forward, smooth and smug. "Clarence Peaton, attorney for the Caldwell estate." "Mrs. Hayes, any documents signed while the deceased was of unsound mind are invalid. Hand them over and spare yourself embarrassment." Roslyn looked from one face to the next. He was sound. He knew exactly what he was doing. Evelyn's smile thinned. "Come now, what do you want, really? Money? I'll give you $500 for everything. Papers, deeds, and your silence." Once, such a sum might have seemed like a fortune. But now Roslyn saw it for what it was. Hush money. "No," she said quietly. Evelyn's expression hardened. "You foolish girl. You're nothing but a pregnant farmhand squatting on bank land. I could have you evicted today." "Maybe," Roslyn said, "but I'd still have the truth." Richard, the son, sneered. "You'll regret this." "Perhaps," Roslyn said, raising the rifle slightly, "but not today." Evelyn's eyes flashed with fury. "You'll hear from my lawyers." She turned sharply, her black skirts swirling. "This isn't over." Roslyn watched them go, heart hammering in her chest. Only when the carriages vanished over the rise did she lower the rifle and sink into a chair. She had stood her ground, but she knew this was just the beginning. That night, she woke to the smell of smoke. Fire. She stumbled to the window and saw flames devouring her chicken coop, sparks leaping toward the roof of the barn. Grabbing a bucket, she ran barefoot into the cold night, her belly heavy, heart pounding. She fought the flames until her arms ached, but it was no use. The coop collapsed in a shower of sparks. By dawn, everything was gone. Her chickens, her feed, her hope. Fresh wagon tracks in the dirt told her what she already knew. Evelyn's threats had turned into action. The next day, she found her garden salted, her well rope cut, and the fence around her small corral slashed apart. In town, people whispered as she passed. Old friends looked away. The shopkeeper, once kind, now spoke in a nervous whisper. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, glancing around. "Mrs. Whitmore's been spreading word. Folks are scared. I can't risk losing business. Please understand." Roslyn's voice was steady. "I do." He pushed a small package of food across the counter. "No charge." But maybe take her offer, ma'am. Sometimes it's better to bend than break. Walking home, Roslyn felt eyes on her from every window. She'd become the town's gossip, the fool who thought she could stand against the Caldwells. But she wasn't done yet. That night, she wrote a telegram to the federal marshal's office in Cheyenne. Urgent stop. Threats and arson stop. Need protection stop. Mrs. Roslyn Hayes, Laramie stop. The telegraph operator hesitated. Ma'am, this'll stir trouble. It already has, she said. Send it. That evening, trouble arrived again. 6 riders thundered into her yard, led by a scar-faced man with cold eyes. He dismounted and called out, Mrs. Hayes, we need to talk. Roslyn opened the door, rifle in hand. Say what you came to say. He smiled, a cruel, practiced smile. Name's Garrett. Mrs. Whitmore sent me. Seems you've been sending telegrams. That wasn't wise. Neither was burning a woman's home, she said flatly. He chuckled. Accidents happen. Look, Mrs. Hayes, my employer's a generous woman. Take $300 now, sign a little paper, and all this unpleasantness goes away. Tomorrow, the offer drops to 100. Day after that, maybe nothing. Roslyn raised the rifle slightly. Get off my land. His grin faded. You'll regret this. Maybe, she said, but you'll regret it first if you don't ride away right now. He studied her for a long moment, then tipped his hat. You've got grit, I'll give you that. Shame it won't save you. They rode off laughing, leaving her shaking with fury. She locked the door, set the rifle beside her chair, and sat awake till dawn, listening for hoofbeats that never came. By morning, she had made her choice. She wouldn't give in. She wouldn't let them destroy what Benjamin trusted her with. She wrote letters to newspapers, to the governor, to lawyers in Denver, explaining everything. She handed them to passing travelers, hoping one would reach someone willing to help. Days later, she received word from the courthouse. The will was being challenged. Evelyn Caldwell Whitmore versus Roslyn Hayes. The trial was swift but brutal. Evelyn's lawyers painted Roslyn as a schemer, a liar, a desperate woman who had tricked a dying man. Roslyn stood alone before the judge, trembling but determined. I didn't trick anyone, she said simply. I helped a stranger because it was right. He made his choice because he was kind. Then, as hope began to fade, 2 traitors entered the courtroom, Josiah Mills and Miguel Santos. They testified they had seen Benjamin alive and lucid, signing the will with his own hand. Their words cut through Evelyn's lies like sunlight through storm clouds. The judge listened in silence, then brought down his gavel. The will stands, he declared. Mrs. Roslyn Hayes is the lawful heir to the Caldwell estate. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others whispered. Evelyn turned pale with rage. This isn't over, she hissed, stepping close to Roslyn. You'll never hold what's his, you're a nobody. Roslyn met her gaze. Maybe, but I was the only one who gave him water when he needed it most. Outside, the wind swept across the plains as if echoing the verdict. Weeks later, winter snow blanketed the rocking sea ranch. Inside its great house, Roslyn sat by the fire, cradling her newborn daughter, Margaret, named for Benjamin's lost wife. The child's small fingers curled around hers as the firelight danced across the room. Jake Morrison stepped quietly into the doorway. Mrs. Hayes, he said softly, Mr. Caldwell would have been proud. The ranch is prospering. The men respect you. Roslyn smiled through tired eyes. Thank you, Jake. But it's not just mine. It's theirs, too. All of it is. She looked out through the frost-covered window at the vast stretch of land beyond. The land that was once a stranger's empire. And now, through a single act of compassion, her child's inheritance. Roslyn Hayes, the poor pregnant widow who once had nothing, had kept her promise. And across the wide, frozen Wyoming plains, the wind carried a sound that almost seemed like Benjamin Caldwell's voice, steady, warm, and proud. Thank you for the water,